the last week of October 1937, a frantic telegram lands on a desk at the Food and Drug Administration in Washington. It's coming straight from the American Medical Association in Chicago, and it's carrying news of a medical crisis unfolding so fast, authorities are just scrambling to catch up.
Down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, physicians had just made a truly grim realization. They were treating patients for completely common ailments, sore throats, things like that. But suddenly, those same patients were dying of severe kidney failure. And the only common thread linking every single one of these fatalities, a very specific raspberry-flavored liquid medicine sold in little amber glass bottles. The race was officially on.
The sheer scale of this emergency is honestly hard to wrap your head around. Within days of that telegram, the FDA committed its entire field force. We're talking 240 inspectors and chemists, given one single desperate task: find every last bottle of that liquid in the United States before another drop gets swallowed. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly was this substance at the center of a frantic nationwide manhunt? Well, it wasn't some mysterious, unknown chemical. Actually, it was the exact opposite. The drug was sulfanilamide. And in the 1930s, this was arguably one of the most celebrated medical substances on the planet. It was a certified wonder drug. Originally synthesized as a dye intermediate way back in 1908, researchers eventually realized it had this miraculous ability to protect against streptococcal infections. And since the original patent had long expired, anyone could make it. By 1937, it's a household name. Dozens of American pharmaceutical firms were safely selling it by the truckload as solid tablets and powders. So, enter the S.E. Massengill Company. They're a mid-sized pharmaceutical house based down in Bristol, Tennessee. In June of 1937, their southern salesmen pass along a customer request that introduces what sounds like a pretty straightforward chemical problem. Customers just wanted a liquid form of sulfanilamide, which makes perfect sense, right? Liquids are way easier to give to sick kids or anyone who just can't swallow a giant, chalky tablet. But they hit a massive hurdle. The chemical reality of this wonder drug is that it dissolves terribly in both water and alcohol. So the headache of finding a workable solvent fell squarely on the shoulders of the company's chief chemist, a guy named Harold Cole Watkins. Watkins goes back to his lab and just starts running through solvents. He's mixing, he's testing, desperately looking for anything that will force the stubborn powder to dissolve into a liquid. And this is where things take a truly shocking turn. Watkins actually finds a perfect match. A chemical called diethylene glycol dissolved the drug beautifully. But here's the catch. Diethylene glycol is a cheap industrial chemical. It's the stuff used in brake fluid, in lacquer solvents, and in antifreeze. And here's the perspective shift you probably didn't see coming. Taking industrial antifreeze, using it to dissolve medicine, and selling it to the public without a single test for human safety, that was 100% legal at the time. No laws broken whatsoever. Let's look at Watkins' completely untested recipe. It was roughly 10% of the active wonder drug, completely suspended in a deadly base of diethylene glycol and water. To mask the harsh chemical reality of what it actually was, he just heavily flavored it with raspberry extract, colored it with some caramel, and loaded it up with saccharin for sweetness. The control lab checks it for appearance, fragrance, and taste. It looked and smelled great. Safety tests on animals or humans? Literally zero. Because again, the law simply didn't demand it. Production rolls out in August 1937. They whip up about 240 gallons of the stuff, slap the brand name Elixir Sulfanamide on the bottle, and blast it out across the country from branch depots in Kansas City, New York, and San Francisco, which of course inevitably triggers that desperate federal manhunt. Once the deaths started in October, that massive FDA field operation kicked into overdrive with a relentless boots-on-the-ground strategy. Working basically around the clock, inspectors traced the shipments backward. They tracked the poison from giant wholesalers down to local pharmacies, then literally dug through thousands of paper prescription records to find individual patients. They are driving out to remote farms, hiking to backwoods boarding houses. In some terrifying cases, they arrived just in time to snatch a half-empty bottle right off a patient's bedside table. The final tally is just heartbreaking. Despite these absolutely heroic efforts by inspectors, who somehow managed to recover all but about 6 gallons out of the 240 shipped across 15 states, the damage was already done. The final death toll recorded by the agency was 107 people. And tragically, a lot of them were young children. As for Harold Watkins, the chemist who actually mixed the poison, He never even saw the conclusion of the legal proceedings against his company. He died in January 1938.
As the dust finally started to settle and all those recovered bottles were locked safely away in federal crates, the US government obviously moved to hold the Massengill Company accountable, but they ran headfirst into an unbelievable linguistic loophole. Remember how I mentioned testing wasn't required? Under the 1906 Pure Food and Drugs Act, the government was completely powerless to seize this drug on the grounds that it was a lethal poison. Manufacturers just didn't have to prove a product was safe. But the FDA found a loophole, and it's a wild one. The company had named the product elixir sulfanilamide. Traditionally in pharmacy, an elixir strictly means a solution containing ethyl alcohol. Watkins' antifreeze mixture didn't have a drop of alcohol, meaning the government could legally seize this deadly poison not because it killed 107 people, but purely because the word elixir on the label was technically a typo. Legally, it was considered misbranding. That absurd technicality was the only legal weapon they had, and it resulted in a maximum fine of just $26,100.
The absolute absurdity of this, the fact that a literal mass poison could only be taken off the market because of a semantic error, sparked a roaring fire in Washington. For 4 long years, a massive new safety bill proposed by Senator Royal Copeland had been completely stalled out in Congress, heavily blocked by industry lobbyists. But when the FDA dropped its report on the 17 deaths in November 1937 and the actual heartbreaking letters from grieving parents were read aloud into the congressional record, the political arithmetic changed overnight. The deadlock shattered. By June 1938, President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act into law. For the first time in American history, a manufacturer had to actually submit evidence that a drug was safe before they were legally allowed to sell it.
But meanwhile, in the quiet storeroom of a Tennessee courthouse, the physical evidence of that frantic October manhunt sat for years on a wooden shelf. Tagged and numbered by the inspectors who had carried them in from across 15 states, a long row of amber bottles just stood there. Some were still completely full, others were emptied almost to the shoulder. And whenever the heavy storeroom door was pushed open, the light from a high window would drift across the shelf, pass straight through the glass, and throw a bright band of blood-red light onto the plaster wall.